Hello you mild-mannered malt maniacs, I'm back again with the fourth homebrew to come out of the brewhouse, a dark mild. This style of beer has enjoyed a relative resurgence in recent times, so much so that the month of May has been deemed Mild Month by Canva, the campaign for Real Ale, to help promote revival of the style. Possibly after the rapid rise of the influence of American craft beer, brewers began to look back on more foundational beer styles for inspiration. The Dark Mild is a beer of English origin and, as you might guess, is an ale of dark colouring and falls alongside popular brown beers of around the 17th century, your stouts and porters. The name mild, you might not guess, didn't originally refer to the flavour or strength, but to the age of the brew, meaning a younger ale as opposed to an old ale style. An old ale was stock beer retained by a brewer or a pub, matured and then blended with milds for customers. These milds were stronger in strength, originally at around 5 to 7% ABV, and were designated with X marks denoting the relative strength of the alcoholic content. However, due to restrictions laid in place by the First World War, this popular style was hit hard and the ABVs dropped, prompting the start of the modern definition of the beer, which was at its peak demand in 1960s Britain. Nowadays, ABVs vary from around the 3 to 3.8% range, and the mild descriptor can refer to this milder strength, as well as the subdued use of hops resulting in a milder bitterness, the milder body, or even the milder colour in comparison with stouts and porters. With that said, it's a flavourful style with bigger focus on dark malt, full of rich chocolate, toffee, roasty, caramel, nutty, biscuity and dark fruit flavours. All of this delivered in a softer, less heavy mouthfeel when compared to stouts, and a much more sessionable characteristic. As a darker beer fan myself, I knew I had to give this one a try, and some research led to wanting to match the Northern English approach to brown ales with a more biscuity palate and a drier finish. After all, despite the accent, I am actually Northwest born and bred. So the yeast for my brew is 1469 West Yorkshire Ale by W Yeast Labs, which lends itself towards being malt forward and dry finishing. The grain bill will be 2% chocolate malt, 2.2% roasted barley, 3.3% Carafe Special 3, 5.9% biscuit malt, 9.1% Crystal 150, and making up the bulk with 77.4% Maris Otter. All of this darker malt will bring us to an EBC of around 57.5, a deep burgundy brown. For the hops, we're keeping it simple with only one addition of good old East Kent Goldings, a classic choice for this style, with 13 grams used during the boil, only bringing us to a predictive IBU of around 36, which is slightly too high for this style officially, but I prefer a bitterer result, so that's fine for my tastes. I mashed the malts at 69 degrees Celsius for 60 minutes and mashed out at 75 degrees for 10 more minutes. At this point I had a pre-boil gravity of 1.027. With a 60-minute boil on the clock, I added 4 grams of East Kent Goldings at the very start, added 4 grams at the middle mark, and then the remaining 5 grams with 5 minutes left. Once cooled to about 20 degrees in the ice bath, I set my sights on an original gravity of around 1.040, which is a tiny bit above official BJCP vitals, and ended up with 1.052. Close, but potentially pointing us at the higher end of a 3 to 3.8% ABV range. In goes the 30ml of liquid yeast, and we give the 5-litre demijohn a good shaking. Then we thoroughly sanitize and add the airlock and bung filled with Chemsan. So now all that's left is to pop it in the fermentation fridge. I have a temperature controller set up so the fridge and heating elements are plugged into that, and basically when the current ambient temperature is too cold or too hot, it'll either set the heating on or it'll set the cooling on as appropriate. This way, fermentation is guaranteed to have a nice, stable and controlled environment, perfect for the yeast to do its job. This display doesn't capture well on camera, so excuse the flickering there, but our target temperature is 20 degrees Celsius. This is the temperature probe. We're going to use electrical tape to attach that to the side of the demijohn to get an accurate reading. We'll let that sit there at 20 degrees for 14 days. Now, in my newbie ignorance, since all the recipes I'd followed so far asked for one, I assumed for this ale I'd need a second fermentation. So, after 2 weeks, I measured out 18 grams of ordinary table sugar and added that and let the beer sit for another 2 weeks. I've since been advised that I didn't necessarily need to do this, so let's see what effect it had on the end result. With 2 days remaining on a 4-week ferment, I popped the demijohn into the fridge to cold crash. Then finally, the dark mild is ready for measuring and tasting. I'm very pleased to say the final gravity reading came out at 1.022, which means we hit an ABV of 3.9%, a very acceptable strength for a dark mild, so I was really pleased with that result. But the all-important part, how did it taste? It came out remarkably smooth with a silky mouthfeel and medium body. There was plenty of chocolate, coffee, nutty and biscuity flavours, as well as a core maltiness, but all in a sessionable and lightly bitter context. The deep dark brown colour was right on the money, and as you can see there was some really good natural carbonation and head retention. The only downside was that the last few bottles, as they'd sat out in room temperature for another 1 to 2 weeks, did suffer a little from a noticeable oxidation, but the first few bottles of the batch were spot on. Overall, I rank this just shy of a 4 out of 5 score with a respectable 3.75 out of 5. I will definitely be making this refreshing, moorish little stout light beer again. But wait, I hear no one in particular asking, what's with the name and that label? Well, I dubbed this brew Beaufort 12 because it is named after the highest rating on the Beaufort wind force scale, inspired by Storm Eunice, a significantly violent storm which raged in the UK while this beer was fermenting, so I featured the weather radar of the storm itself in the label art. The next beer out of the brewhouse, venturing into new waters for me, is a Belgian beer, an attempt at a clone for one of my favourite beers, a Trappist Rochefort 6. Join me again to see how that turned out. Thanks for watching, and until next time, cheers!